Musicians often return to me with a request that sounds something like, "Can you make the bass louder?" And the first instinct is usually, well, let's just add more low end then. But my experienced fellow engineers will tell you that most of the time it's actually about the mid-range. But we are not going to talk about this exact issue in this video. Today we're talking about the things that musicians themselves can actually control. Anyone who knows me as a player knows that I'm a questionable lead guitarist at best. But if there's one thing I've got, it's the rhythm section. I know a thing or two about getting a good sound out of an instrument. And that applies to bass guitar too. Some of what I'm about to tell you today might seem obvious to experienced bassists, though even for them it isn't always. But for guitarists who are constantly trying to track bass parts for their demos and band recordings, I think this will be useful. And bass snobs, forgive me, I'm playing with a pig today, sticking to the canon of bass recording for guitarists. Let's start with the attack. Half of the DI bass signals I get for mixing either completely lack certain frequencies, usually the highs, or are simply played with a weak attack. And here's the thing, besides its own presence and clarity, about half of the density of the guitars and the mix depends on how the bass is played and how it sounds. So why does it matter to really dig in rather than just touching the string? A proper attack, first, locks in with the kick drum. Second, gives the note tightness and stability. Third, makes the bass actually cut through the mix. We had a pop-punk project a while back called I Summon Ducklings, just goofing around covering TikTok songs. I'll be using one of our tracks today to show everything. Even though a weaker attack might seem like it gives you more low end, you can always add that in post, but no plugin is going to give you that feeling of punchy, driving attack that really grooves in the mix. Here is something most people don't think about, probably because they just play however their hand naturally falls. I'm talking about where on the string you're actually picking. It makes a more significant difference than you'd expect. I personally ignored this for a long time. I have a tendency to play right by the bridge, no idea why, I think it just looks cooler. So let's hear what playing near the bridge sounds like. The tone here is focused, with a pronounced low-mid presence. From experience though, it also tends to add a bit of a nasal quality around 600 Hz. Now let's try playing up near the neck. What this does is pull back the 150 to 250 Hz range, and that's actually the zone that gives bass note their presence and definition. Even though the low mids sound a bit cleaner, the string feels very relaxed under the pick, which isn't always ideal in heavier music. You also get noticeably more high-end and clank, and note clarity suffers, especially in the upper registers. Now let's try playing right over the pickup, somewhere in the middle. For me, this is the sweet spot sonically. A good balance of warmth and attack. The middle is truly the middle ground. Bassists, if you're watching this, drop a comment and let me know where you typically play. I'm genuinely curious. I didn't really dig into this myself until recently. You just kind of play where you play, right? None of this is necessarily critical. It really depends on the sound you're going for, but where you pick on the string does matter, and it's worth being intentional about it, both when you're playing and especially when recording. Alright, now let's get into something that's somewhat counterintuitive. From what I've seen, most bassists and guitarists picking up a bass tend to reach for thick picks. Makes sense on the surface. Thick strings, big instrument, so you need a thick pick to drive it, alright? But it's not quite that simple. Here's 2 mm thickness versus 0.7 mm. I used to play bass with thick picks myself, and I'd say a thicker pick does add a certain stiffness, no surprise there, and the sound is a little rougher. But to my ear, a thinner pick simply sounds better on bass. There are a couple of extra things worth mentioning here. If you are working on your attack technique, you'll notice that thin picks don't flop the string around as much, which often just sounds messy. Playing with a thin pick is basically a free compressor on the way in. The harder you hit, the more the pick flexes, which means the note volume doesn't scale proportionally to your attack force. So if you're consistently playing with a strong attack, your note-to-note consistency is going to be much better at the source. This is especially noticeable if you're using the through-the-string picking technique rather than plucking, which I don't recommend. Alright, that's all for today. Remember to drink enough water and track with the right impedance. Thanks for watching and see you next time.